Hello, my name is Levi, and I am a maladaptive daydreamer. Today we're talking about relationships. So I have a very hard time actually dealing with relationships as a maladaptive daydreamer. I wanted to make a video about this because I spoke about relationships in brief in a previous video of mine, but I was sort of speaking about a broad range of relationships like, family, friends, and romantic and all that type of stuff. But today I want to talk about romantic relationships. Yeah, that's very relatable to everyone. I'm going to talk about maladaptive daydreamers in relationships, how fictional relationships, like relationships inside our daydreams, can have an impact on our lives and in turn on our real life relationships, and also why it's difficult to just maintain relationships overall as maladaptive daydreamers. As always, just a little disclaimer again. This is my personal point of view. You may not relate to this at all, or you may relate to it a whole bunch. Either or is pretty cool. We're all different people, different backgrounds, different lives. Yeah. So I firmly believe that communication is really important in any relationship, and not just when it comes to maladaptive daydreaming itself, but for a lot of things. However, when it comes to maladaptive daydreaming, I feel that if the person is comfortable talking about it, they should at least tell the other person about their behaviors. So, what I mean by that is that you don't necessarily have to tell someone, hey, I have this thing called maladaptive daydreaming, but at least communicate with them by saying that, hey, sometimes I'm going to look like I am not present at all and I'm just gonna zone out. Sometimes I need my personal space and sometimes I need alone time. Or you can just tell them that you have maladaptive daydreaming and explain to them what it is if you feel comfortable in doing so. Again, that's up to you. So before I actually knew that I had maladaptive daydreaming, I had a lot of issues when it came to relationships. One of my exes just outright sort of told me that he thought that and I quote, was aware that I had some sort of mental illness going on, which is probably what maladaptive daydreaming looks like to a lot of people. A lot of people are probably just like, oh, something's a little weird with this person. Another ex of mine actually explained it really well. And that's kind of how I explain it to other people from now on. He said that it's like I'm here, but I'm not really present. And I think that's a really good way to tell people that, yeah, I am here, but my mind is sort of in a different space, in a different space and time area thing. Yeah. I know for a fact that maladaptive daydreaming has caused me a whole lot of arguments and misunderstandings in my previous relationships just because I perceive life a lot different than what my partners do or what anyone else does. Maladaptive daydreamers really need partners who sort of understand how they function and how they behave. People who would be comfortable with giving someone space and time to themselves. And also just be chill with the fact that the other person won't be present all the time, like, won't be in reality, grounded in reality. Like, sometimes we're just gonna not be here. And the other person or the partner sort of needs to be chill with that. Honestly, I wish that I knew I had maladaptive daydreaming earlier before I went into relationships, or even during my previous long-term relationships, because the way I usually explain it to people, or at least whenever I meet someone, I warn them, right? I tell them that there are going to be times when I appear cold and distant, and it's not that. And that's how I explained it to people, but people never really, like, people were like, okay, yeah, it's fine. I get that. I'll keep it in mind. But then eventually it actually just comes out that people feel like I just don't give a damn about them, regardless of whether I warn them or not. And it's because they don't understand this thing either. So me not understanding that I had maladaptive daydreaming, plus the confusion of my partners, just added to a whole mix of chaos. That being said, it's also important for partners to just be patient and understand that, everyone is sort of seeking their own answers in life. One of my exes actually got really annoyed with how hooked I was to fantasy and to fictional characters. And that's actually another problem that I want to talk about, is just our relationships in our daydreams sort of mixing with relationships in reality, or even preventing us from getting into relationships in the real world. The problem here is that our fictional daydreams, or our fictional worlds, and our fictional relationships are controlled by us, right? We are in control of what's happening, how we react to certain events, how our partners react, and all that type of stuff. Where in real life, that's not how things are at all. And that is where the problem sets in. That is what makes it that much more difficult to actually have a relationship in real life, because it's so much different to the one in your daydreams. Our fictional relationships are just way more stimulating and interesting as well. I actually notice that whenever I enter a relationship, I have to constantly be stimulated in some way. I have to be kept busy. I have to go travel. I have to see new things. I have to do things. Otherwise, I just become bored and then I retreat back into my daydreams. I have to actually go out of my way to make reality a lot more interesting than my daydreams. Otherwise, I have this power struggle within myself about whether I am actually in reality or in fiction. I remember in my previous relationships, it was very difficult for me. I would get so frustrated because I tried so hard not to slip into fantasy, or not to slip into my daydreams, so that I don't appear cold and distant. And I mean, that happened anyway, because it's impossible for someone to constantly be kept entertained in the real world, right? It's impossible to be constantly entertained and constantly be interested and constantly be doing things and stuff like that. And I think that that's also what made it so much more difficult. I was really trying my damnedest just to make things in the real world work. And then when it was like chill time, or when I didn't have anything to do, I would just disappear into my daydreams. I think that this also has a lot to do with my partner as well. For me, it's a lot easier to be with someone who shares my interests, like, especially, like, let's say, who are interested in the same games as I am, or the same anime, or movies, or series, or even fictional characters. Like, even if they just know about the fictional characters that I love or I care about, like, that's already a really big thing to me. And it's really important, right? Because then I have something to talk to them about. The great thing about that is, when you have a partner who actually shares your interests, is that you have something to talk about. And then maladaptive daydreamers, with their sort of hyperfixations and their obsessions, they can talk to their partners without their partners feeling overwhelmed or annoyed by the lack of talking about anything else. This actually makes me remember my long-term relationship. My partner and I had very similar interests. We watched the same anime, we played the same games, and our conversations would be based on those games or anime or fictional characters. And from there on out, it wouldn't just be superficial conversations. These conversations would be really deep and meaningful, and that's what added meaning to the relationship. However, the problem is that eventually, with maladaptive daydreaming, it just feels like there's no stop. There's really no stop for maladaptive daydreamers. We can carry on talking about these things for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and eventually the other person feels overwhelmed, or just tired of talking about these things, or they just feel like they're being replaced by our interests, especially if our interests pertain to fictional characters. This comes back to being in a relationship with someone who doesn't know you have maladaptive daydreaming, and to make it even worse, you don't know you have maladaptive daydreaming. You have different interests, and so it just doesn't work out at all, because the things you want to talk about, the things that your mind is constantly hyperfixated on, you feel like you're just annoying the other person with talking about that stuff, or you're just overwhelming them, or eventually they just feel like, you know what, well, everything that I'm trying to talk about, you don't even care about. So do you even care about me? And vice versa. So there's a lot of problems that can come in there. But again, I don't know if anyone else actually feels the same way I do on this, but this is just my opinion. This is how I personally feel. So really the question is just, how do we make non-maladaptive daydreamers understand how we feel? How do we make them understand how we perceive life and how we need reality to sort of be more interesting and be more stimulating than our daydreams, which is damn near impossible in itself already. Otherwise, we're just going to retreat back into our own worlds. And even if we do, how do we make them understand that, hey, I maybe need this time and space to not be here. I need to, as someone once told me in my comments, which stuck with me, log off from the real world. That's a really good way to see it. Honestly, it's extremely difficult. I'm not gonna lie here. It requires a lot of time, effort, and patience. Maybe even a ton of open-mindedness and willingness to both teach and learn. Both parties have to be equally patient with each other. So let's talk about fictional relationships. I grew up with a fairly big presence on Tumblr in the 2012, 2013. I don't know if my audience is too young to remember that, but my generation on Tumblr and on Twitter was like Twitter prom, shipping yourself with original characters, shipping your original characters with certain games characters or series characters. And that still happens, but it was a very big thing on Tumblr back in my day. For me personally, I have a really, really hard time entering a relationship with just anyone. I'm very specific and I can almost say snobbish when it comes to most people. And I mean, it isn't fair to them, right? It isn't fair to other people, but also at the same time, preferences are also normal to have. It's okay to have preferences in people, but it becomes a problem when you use those preferences to judge other people without giving them a chance, right? But for me, it's so difficult because I constantly put fictional characters against real people, and that makes me sound like such a terrible person. The problem comes in when our preferences in other people for romantic or platonic relationships are directly, or I can almost say very closely directly, yeah, that's English. When it's directly related to a fictional characters or a character in our daydreams. Because oftentimes fictional characters just display really unrealistic personalities and behaviors. And those behaviors and personalities will be damn near impossible, or at least very difficult to find in real life people. Coming back to what I said earlier about my one ex, eventually he just felt that the fictional characters who I love so much, even though I didn't think about my parami being in a relationship with them, it was more just like a platonic friendship type of thing. He eventually felt that the fictional characters or the fictional world in my head, which he didn't even know about, he didn't know about my MD or the paracosm I have, but he thought that these fictional characters are just more important to me than he was. So yeah, anyway, the point I want to make is that I guess a good way to combat this, or to just try and bring some balance into your life, is to sort of bring some order to your life. I think something important is also just to remember that it's good to have balance. Your real life doesn't have to be as important or eventful as your daydreams. Like, it's good to take a break from the action and from the good stuff. You cannot constantly be surrounded by good stuff. You need bad stuff as well. That's just life. So I think that that's good to remember as well. Anyway, I am not a love therapist or whatever you want to call it, and I am actually very bad with relationships. But anyway, that is it from me for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching whatever you're doing. If you're engaging with my content, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And yeah, please take care of yourselves. Make good choices as always. Love you guys. Bye.